The senator from Tennessee.
I'm here today to discuss worrying developments in Mexico, our neighbors to the south, and to promote a solution on which we can all work together in the next Congress. Sadly, I also need to call out actions by our own U.S. trade representative that would directly undermine American companies facing threats from Mexico by allowing the Mexican government to expropriate their properties. Under the leadership of Mexico's previous president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, colloquially known as AMLO, and current president Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican government is committing a blatant theft against a major American company and, by extension, the United States itself. Earlier this year, AMLO launched an aggressive campaign of intimidation and lawfare to support the outright theft of assets in Mexico belonging to Vulcan Materials, an Alabama-based company that has been a trusted partner in our nation's infrastructure development for decades. Vulcan built and operated the only deepwater port on the Yucatan Peninsula and has used it to supply the crushed limestone essential to infrastructure projects from Florida to California. Vulcan's operations in Mexico are not just a business venture, they form a critical link in our supply chain and a testament to the importance of American investment in Mexico. But AMLO decided that he wanted Vulcan's assets for himself. Cloaking his true intentions under the facade of environmental claims, AMLO shut down Vulcan's operations, sent armed law enforcement and the military to intimidate Vulcan's employees. And now, under his hand-picked successor, President Sheinbaum, Mexico is now seizing Vulcan's deepwater port. President Sheinbaum now seeks to finalize this theft by declaring the property a naturally protected area. Let's call this what it is: corruption dressed up as environmentalism. This is not protection, it's plunder. Lending any credence to this authorization is absurd. These actions violate international norms, they ignore contractual obligations, they trample over the U.S.-Canada-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, again, an agreement where America actually gives preferential trade treatment to Mexico. Surely, America's government is standing up for her own nation's interest in the face of this brazen misconduct by the government of Mexico, right? Sadly, no. A key reason for the current circumstances is an absence of American leadership, especially at the office of the United States Trade Representative. America's top trade representative, or America's top trade negotiator, the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai, along with our State Department, have stood idly by while AMLO and Sheinbaum have escalated their anti-trade and anti-American agenda. Their inaction has sent a dangerous signal that the United States will allow its businesses around the world to be bullied, its laws to be ignored, and its negotiated agreements to be undermined. And it gets worse. Now, as reported in the Wall Street Journal, we're learning that the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative is siding with Mexico against the interest of U.S. firms by reinterpreting trade rules in a way that will erode the rights of American investors whose property was either confiscated or expropriated. According to news reports, USTR wants to limit the ability to seek redress by American companies whose property is expropriated. I stand here before my colleagues in the Senate asking why neither Congress nor the U.S. companies that would be impacted by these actions were ever consulted before the USTR stealthily moved to alter the USMCA agreement in a manner that undermines American interests. Ambassador Tai and USTR leadership need to clearly understand how negatively their actions will be reviewed or be viewed by this Congress. I can assure you, they'll not be forgotten. Making last-minute 11th-hour changes to U.S. trade agreements without review from Congress or the U.S. companies that would be negatively impacted is outright malpractice. It's a slap in the face of American investors and employers who've risked their capital overseas. And it will drive scarcity and inflation of critical infrastructure materials in the U.S., if Mexico is allowed to confiscate these assets, including a very strategic deepwater port. The implications of Mexico's theft and the failure of U.S. trade officials to defend America's interest go far beyond Vulcan Materials. They directly attack the foundational principles of reciprocal trade, investor protection, and the rule of law. If Mexico is allowed to target without repercussion a company like Vulcan, one that employs thousands of Americans and has operated responsibility in Mexico for decades, that means no American business is safe in Mexico. This kind of lawlessness will shatter investor confidence in Mexico. Why would any U.S. company risk capital in a country where contracts are meaningless, regulations are weaponized, and property can be seized at the government's whim? This erosion of trust threatens not only American jobs, but also the economic integration of North America, which many think is vital to our national security and our global competitiveness. Let's remember what the USMCA was supposed to be: a safeguard for trade and investment, a framework to protect the rule of law, and a cornerstone of North American prosperity. AMLO and Sheinbaum have shredded the spirit of this agreement by expropriating Vulcan's port and its property and by pursuing an anti-investor agenda. AMLO and Sheinbaum are acting like saboteurs of the partnership that binds our two nations. Congress must respond with strength and resolve. Rather than roll over under the ruse of environmentalism, the United States Trade Representative should follow its duty, as stated on its own website, to protect American rights under our trade agreements and, quote, ensure that American workers, farmers, ranchers, and businesses receive the maximum benefit under our international trade agreement. What the USTR is contemplating now is anything but that. That's why my colleagues and I are fully committed to passing S. 5137, the Defending American Property Abroad Act. This legislation will ensure that those who benefit from stolen American assets, whether they be individuals or governments, face substantial consequences. The Defending American Property Abroad Act will prohibit vessels that utilize expropriated American infrastructure from ever entering U.S. ports. It will bar such facilities from U.S. trade and mandate a full accounting of these violations in the upcoming 2026 USMCA review. The Defending American Property Abroad Act will make clear to President Sheinbaum that the United States will not tolerate the theft of American property. AMLO and Sheinbaum must understand that their actions will have serious consequences. I will not stand by as Mexico betrays its commitments and undermines decades of cooperation. The United States must defend its companies, its workers, and its principles with unwavering strength. That's why I'm calling on my colleagues to join me in urgently finalizing and passing the Defending American Property Abroad Act in the next Congress. This cannot wait. Mexico's actions are a test of our resolve. If we fail to respond decisively, we will invite further aggression, not just from Mexico, but from every foreign leader watching to see if America will defend its interests. The United States should never be bullied, stolen from, or too feckless to respond to efforts to undermine its strength and sovereignty. And here at home, USTR leadership must immediately reverse course from its plan to renegotiate trade rules and pull the rug from under U.S. firms. A particularly disgraceful capstone, I might say, for the reputation of this outgoing administration. Mr. President, I yield the floor to my colleague from Virginia, Senator Kaine.
Mr. President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I'm glad to be here with my colleagues from Tennessee and Alabama to speak about this Mexican government's unfair and discriminatory treatment of Vulcan Materials, and to encourage colleagues to support the Defending American Property Abroad Act. Before I get into the details, and I see I'm engendering an amazing response from the gallery, I do want to say I was a strong supporter of the USMCA. NAFTA was 20 years old, and any deal after 20 years, you would have learned what worked, what didn't, how to make it better. And I viewed USMCA as a significant achievement of the Trump administration, which I was glad to support, and it got the overwhelming and bipartisan support of this body as well as the House. I'm very worried about incursions into this deal. We'll have plenty of time to talk next year about one worry I have, which is the incoming administration's proposal to levy tariffs against Canada and Mexico. My thought is, once you have a trade agreement that's a state-of-the-art trade agreement that has been voted for by an overwhelming bipartisan majority, that gives you an avenue of communication that you should be able to use with Canada and Mexico, and you shouldn't need to use tariffs against these trade partners. You should use the framework of the agreement to resolve disputes that you have. But that's a matter for another day. Today I want to talk about in some detail the matter that my friend and colleague Senator Hagerty raised, which is the treatment of Vulcan materials. And it's not just the treatment of Vulcan, but what it might say either about the Mexican government's treatment of American companies generally, or frankly, the American government's posture of either battling to protect American companies or standing by while they're mistreated. Vulcan is headquartered in Alabama. I see colleagues from Alabama on the floor, but employs over 1,000 people in Virginia, nearly 70 facilities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Vulcan has been operating in the Yucatan Peninsula for more than 30 years. Senator Hagerty and I came to the floor to talk about this matter a number of months ago in the hopes that we might be able to avert what the AMLO administration has done, but nevertheless, even in a transition of government, Mexico has continued to ratchet up efforts to seize Vulcan's property in the Yucatan. These actions against Vulcan were initiated, to be sure, by the Lopez Obrador administration, but with the inauguration of the new President Sheinbaum earlier in 2024, these efforts that would continue to degrade the rule of law in Mexico continue. They're chilling investor confidence. They're making Mexico a more challenging place for American firms to do business. In August, I joined Senators Cardin, Risch, and Rubio in expressing our deep concern over proposed constitutional reforms in Mexico.
Senator will be in order.
Separate and apart from the matter of Vulcan, there's a larger context of actions in Mexico that should cause us some significant concerns. There was a judicial reform underway in Mexico promoted by the AMLO administration that was widely viewed by civil actors within Mexico, human rights and other organizations, as an effort to undermine the independence of the judiciary and make it harder for the Mexican judiciary to stand up against actions, illegal actions by the Mexican government. We strongly urge the AMLO administration in this bipartisan letter, as well as the incoming administration, to pursue only reforms that enhanced the professionalism and the independence of the judiciary, but unfortunately, neither administration has heeded our call and instead moved forward on implementing reforms that weaken the independence of the Mexican judiciary. Taken together, the direct bad faith actions against Vulcan and the two administrations' insistence on degrading the independence of the Mexican judiciary are jeopardizing critical economic security interests of both of our nations. Mexico is one of the top 3 trade partners of the United States, whether you measure by outgoing or incoming, top 3, and certainly it's the same in Virginia. Our two countries have a long history of friendship, and our cultural ties run deep. The NAFTA, followed by the USMCA, have integrated supply chains in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico in a degree that I view as generally positive. We do share essential traditions of democracy, and they require consistent work to ensure strong and independent institutions. Looking more closely at the USMCA in particular, my colleague talked about worries that rules are being renegotiated around the resolution of disputes that would make it harder for Vulcan and companies like Vulcan to seek assistance. We've been in this free trade agreement for 3 decades now. In exchange for preferential access to American markets, which has resulted in the intertwined supply chain that I described, Mexico has committed to uphold certain standards that American workers, consumers, companies, and investors expect. The standards were reinforced and strengthened in the USMCA in 2019. They include robust protection for workers, for the environment, and for companies operating abroad. And the standards not only protect Americans, but promote economic growth in Mexico, helping address the root causes of migration and other challenges. The protections for American investments, for instance, give certainty to other companies and investors looking to participate in helping grow and expand the Mexican economy. And so particularly as companies are looking to nearshore in the aftermath of COVID, looking to bring supply chains back to the United States and nations closer to the United States with whom we have free trade agreements, Mexico has been seen as a very attractive destination. But actions like those that are being taken against Vulcan now undermine that momentum. So in response to these actions, Senators Hagerty, Britt, Tuberville, Barrasso, Budd, and I introduced the Defending American Property Abroad Act earlier this year. And the bill would make clear that the U.S. does not condone discriminatory treatment against American companies, particularly with free trade agreement partners. We understand, even if we don't accept the notion, that some American companies are put at great disadvantage in nations where there are not trade agreements. But where there are trade agreements, particularly an agreement like USMCA, which is going to be scheduled for a renegotiation and consideration in 2026, we should not condone mistreatment of American companies by our trade agreement partners. The bill that we have introduced would reiterate that it's a bipartisan priority in Congress for the U.S. government to work to uphold the USMCA's investment standards in the upcoming 6-year review of the trade agreement. It would work to deter Mexico and any country in our hemisphere from illegally seizing additional U.S. assets. We must make it clear that this behavior will not be tolerated. I note for my colleague, with some sense of dismay, that I think I have some colleagues on my side of the aisle that don't like the notion that a disappointed company can seek relief against a regulation put in place by another country. They're concerned about whether that is a violation of sovereignty in some sense. And yes, it is the case that the USMCA leaves wide latitude for the participating nations to adopt their own regulatory framework. But there should be no disagreement in this body that an effort to completely seize the property of an American company can never be justified as an appropriate regulatory action, and that is what is happening with Vulcan. And I would hope colleagues on both sides of the aisle, thinking about companies in their own states, would realize if this is allowed to happen with the U.S. turning a blind eye or shrugging their shoulders to it, you will see a lot more of it, and we need to stop this now. So I look forward to continuing to work to pass our bill next Congress. We must ensure that the future of the U.S.-Mexico relationship continues to be grounded in the rule of law. I'm the chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee of the Foreign Relations Committee. I care about this relationship. I want it to get stronger and stronger. I celebrate its successes. I celebrate Mexico's successes, but I don't hesitate to stand and challenge actions either by the Mexican government or the inaction of the United States government that pose risks to Americans and American companies. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.